4 months ago, a colleague of mine sent me a trail camera clip with a message that said simply, "Weird wolf behavior." Thoughts? I opened the attachment on my laptop during my lunch break at the Conservation Trust office where I now work. I watched the clip once, then I watched it again. Then a third time, with the volume up, though there was nothing to hear. I closed the laptop. I did not open it again for 2 days. I told my colleague I had not been able to review it yet, that I had a report deadline, that I would get back to her. I have not gotten back to her. I do not know how to get back to her. Because what was in that clip was something I documented 4 years ago in the Flathead National Forest, and I had spent those 4 years hoping it was specific to one place. The clip told me it was not. My name is Marin Solis. I spent 4 seasons as a wildlife and backcountry ranger at the Keller Creek Ranger Post in northwestern Montana. Before that, I had 8 years of field experience in wildlife biology, population surveys, predator-prey dynamics, habitat assessment, livestock conflict mitigation. I have a degree in wildlife biology from the University of Montana. I have handled black bears. I have darted elk. I have spent more nights alone in the forest than I have spent in cities, and I have never been frightened of what lives in wild places. I want to establish that clearly before I tell you about the 6 rules, because the rules did not come from a frightened person. They came from someone who had paid very close attention to something that did not want to be paid attention to, and who had written down the appropriate response in plain, careful language on a single sheet of paper. I need to explain the rules before I tell you what was in that clip. I need you to understand what I was looking at and why it meant what it meant. I arrived at Keller Creek in early April, during the last hard freeze of the season. The post sat in a clearing carved out of mixed conifer forest lodgepole pine, Engelmann spruce, and western larch, still bare at that elevation. The larch just beginning to show the first faint green of new needles. The building was a single-story structure, modest and functional, with a main office, a small lab room for data processing, a kitchen, and a covered equipment porch on the south side. Behind the post, 30 yards back, the tree line started and did not stop for miles. Keller Creek ran east of the clearing, a fast, cold drainage that still carried ice at its margins in April. And about a mile downstream, it widened into a shallow beaver pond that I would come to know well. The nearest town was Hungry Horse, 28 miles south on a 2-lane road that was passable in all but the worst weather. The nearest other ranger post was 40 minutes by truck. I was, for all practical purposes, alone there. That suited me perfectly. My job was wildlife monitoring. 3 survey transects ran north, east, and west from the post, each one marked with numbered posts and fitted with motion-triggered trail cameras. I pulled the SD cards weekly, processed the images in the lab, logged the data, and submitted reports to the district wildlife biologist, a man named Frank Okafor, who drove up from Hungry Horse roughly once a month to review my data and drink my coffee. Beyond the camera work, I conducted weekly elk population counts in the high meadow 4 miles north, managed the livestock conflict zone at the forest's western boundary, where the trees gave way to private ranch land, and handled any wildlife incidents, nuisance bear calls, livestock predation reports, orphaned animal recoveries that came in from the surrounding area. I loved it immediately. I want to be specific about that. I loved pulling the camera cards in the cold morning before the sun cleared the ridge, my breath fogging in the still air, the spruce branches dripping with melt. I loved sitting in the truck at the meadow edge at first light with my binoculars, watching the elk materialize from the tree line like quiet gray ships. I loved the French press coffee I made every morning because the drip machine had broken in my first week, and I never bothered to replace it. I loved the sound of Keller Creek running at the edges of ice, that particular high, clear sound of cold water moving fast over smooth stone. I loved the weight of my field notebook in my vest pocket, the specific satisfaction of filling a page with clean data. I loved the logic of it. Wildlife biology is, at its foundation, the study of pattern. Animals follow patterns. Patterns reveal needs, behaviors, relationships, pressures. Learn the pattern, and you understand the animal. I had spent 8 years learning patterns, and I was good at it. And the Keller Creek Post gave me a rich and complex ecosystem to read. I was, in those first weeks, genuinely happy. I found the page during my first week, tucked inside the back cover of the Wildlife Incident Binder. The binder was a 3-ring affair, thick with plastic sleeves holding incident reports going back several years. I had been going through it systematically, familiarizing myself with the Post's history. The page was folded in half and wedged behind the back cover, rather than filed in a sleeve, as if it had been placed there quickly, or privately, or both. I unfolded it and read it at the kitchen table, with my French press coffee going cold beside me. At the top, in handwriting that was careful and unhurried, it said, Animal Behavior Non-Standard Protocol. Below that, 6 numbered rules. I read them twice. My first reaction was mild amusement. My second reaction was professional curiosity about the person who had written them. They were not Forest Service protocol. They did not match any wildlife management guideline I had studied or practiced. They described specific animal behaviors and prescribed specific human responses to those behaviors. And the responses were, in most cases, the opposite of what standard wildlife management training would suggest. Don't haze the bear. Don't shine a light on the elk. Don't chase the bird out. Don't review the camera footage for 72 hours. Break eye contact first. Don't report the dead animal. I attributed the page to my predecessor, a ranger named Adler. The district had mentioned him briefly during my onboarding. He had served 2 seasons at the post and then transferred to a desk position. They described him as competent but quiet. I filed the page in my personal notebook rather than back in the binder, and I told myself it was the kind of thing that happened at remote posts. Individual rangers developing their own local protocols based on experience, sometimes leaning into superstition when the isolation got long. I was not dismissive of it. I was simply not prepared to take it seriously yet. That changed 3 weeks into my first season. The first rule was the one that made me stop treating the page like a curiosity. It was a Thursday evening in late April. The light was going. The clearing behind the post settling into that particular blue-gray dusk that comes early at elevation when the sky is clear and the cold moves in fast. I was on the equipment porch sorting gear when I looked up and saw the bear. It was a black bear, a large adult male by its size, standing at the exact boundary where the tree line ended and the clearing began. Not in the trees, not in the clearing. At the precise margin between the two, where the last shadow of the spruce reached the open ground. It was standing still. Not the stillness of a bear that has scented something and is trying to identify it, which involves a raised head, a working nose, small shifts of weight. This was the stillness of a bear that had already identified what it was looking at and had decided to keep looking. It was facing the post directly. Its head was level. It made no sound. My training activated immediately. A bear at the tree line behind a ranger post at dusk, exhibiting no fear response and no departure behavior, is a situation that calls for hazing. I reached for the kit. The cracker shells, the air horn, the bear spray on my belt. My hand was on the case. Then I thought of the rule. The first rule. If a bear approaches the post and stops at exactly the tree line without vocalizing, do not make eye contact. Go inside, close the door, and log the time and duration. Do not attempt to haze it. I looked at the bear's position. It had stopped at exactly the tree line. It had not vocalized. I set the hazing kit down. I looked at the porch floor, not at the bear. I went inside. I closed the door. I sat at the kitchen table and started the clock on my watch. The bear stood there for 41 minutes. I know that because I was watching the clock the entire time, sitting very still at the kitchen table with my notebook open to a blank page and a pen in my hand. I logged the start time, 7:14 p.m. I logged the end time, 7:55 p.m., when I heard from the kitchen, or rather, when I stopped hearing anything at all, a subtle shift in the quality of the outdoor silence that told me the clearing behind the post was empty again. I went to the window. The tree line was unbroken. The clearing was empty. The bear was gone. I had not heard it move. There had been no sound of brush parting, no snapped branch, no departing footfall. It was simply no longer there. I logged it. Species, estimated age class, sex, time of first observation, duration, behavior description, stationary at tree line, no vocalization, no threat display, no foraging behavior, no response to observer movement inside building. I wrote it the way I wrote everything, in the neutral language of documentation. Then I sat with the notebook and thought about what I had written. Bears do not stand still for 41 minutes. A black bear in normal behavioral range will investigate, forage, display, or depart. It will shift its weight. It will breathe visibly. It will do something that reflects the ongoing operation of an animal nervous system responding to a dynamic environment. This bear had done none of those things. It had stood at the tree line and watched the post with the consistency of a security camera. In the morning, I pulled the SD card from the trail camera mounted on the equipment porch overhang, the one I used to monitor the clearing for bear activity. I brought it to the lab and loaded it on my laptop. The footage showed the bear. It showed the bear's approach, a slow, deliberate walk from the center of the tree line, moving in a straight line toward the post, stopping at the exact margin of shadow and open ground. The footage showed the full, 41 minutes of the bear standing at the tree line. And then it showed the bear turning and walking back into the trees. I watched it twice before I understood what was wrong with it. What was wrong with it was this. From the moment the bear entered the frame until the moment it exited, its eyes did not move from the post building. It did not look at the ground. It did not look at the sky. It did not look at the brush to either side. It looked at the post building with an unwavering, fixed attention that I had never seen in any bear footage I had processed in 8 years of wildlife work. Bears are curious, opportunistic, and constantly scanning. Their eyes move. Their attention shifts. This bear's attention did not shift. It was watching the post the way you watch something you are trying to understand. I closed the footage. I sat in the lab for a while. Then I took the handwritten page out of my personal notebook and read all 6 rules from the beginning. I did not dismiss any of them after that. The second rule took another month to make itself known, and it came at night, which made it worse. It was late May. The nights were still cold, dropping into the low 30s after midnight, but the days had lengthened and the snow had retreated to the upper ridges. I had been conducting nighttime elk surveys twice a week, sitting in the truck at the meadow edge with a spotlight and my observation forms, counting animals and recording location data. It was methodical work that I found quietly satisfying the truck cab, warm against the cold night. The spotlight cutting a clean white beam through the dark. The elk moving through it like characters in a slideshow. I was returning from the meadow at 11:40 p.m., driving south on the forest road back toward the post. The road crossed Keller Creek on a small 1-lane bridge, a concrete span about 20 feet wide, with pipe railings and a 6-foot drop to the water. I slowed automatically as I approached the bridge, as I always did, and my headlights swung across the creek. There was a cow elk standing in the middle of the creek, facing upstream. I stopped the truck on the bridge and cut the engine. The creek was perhaps 40 feet wide at that point, fast and cold, running maybe knee-deep on an elk. The cow was positioned in the center of the current, her legs submerged to mid-cannon, facing directly upstream. She was not drinking. She was not moving at all. Her head was level, not lowered to the water. Her ears were still. In the ambient light from my headlights, which were still washing across the scene, I could see that her sides were not visibly rising and falling with breath, though at that distance in that light, I could not be certain. My spotlight was on the seat beside me. Every instinct I had said to pick it up, to illuminate the animal properly, to confirm what I was seeing, and assess its condition. A motionless elk standing in cold water at midnight could be a sick animal, could be an injured animal, could be something requiring intervention. I reached for the spotlight. The second rule stopped my hand. If an elk or deer is observed standing in the creek at night, facing upstream and motionless for more than 10 minutes, do not shine a light on it. Note the date and weather conditions and leave the area. I had not timed it yet. I set the spotlight back on the seat and checked my watch. 11:43 p.m., I turned the headlights off. The creek went dark. I could still see the elk, barely, as a pale shape in the darkness, lit by starlight and the faint glow of a waxing moon above the ridge to the east. I sat in the dark truck on the bridge and watched. I am a biologist. I spent those 17 minutes doing what biologists do, which is observe and reason. I ran through every biological explanation for what I was seeing. Hypothermia can cause stupor in ungulates, but a healthy adult elk in late May, in water that temperature, would show trembling, altered gait, a seeking behavior toward shore. Neurological events infection, toxin exposure, can cause rigidity, but they present with other signs: abnormal eye position, muscle fasciculation, salivation. I cataloged what I did not see. I did not see trembling. I did not see any seeking behavior. I did not see any observable respiration. I did not see any muscle movement at all. What I saw was an animal that appeared to have been paused. At 11:57 p.m., 17 minutes after I had stopped, the cow elk walked out of the creek. She moved normally, a calm, unhurried walk up the near bank, through the riparian brush, and into the tree line. The transition from total stillness to normal locomotion was immediate, with no intermediate movement, no shaking off of the cold water, no hesitation. She simply resumed being an elk and walked away. I sat on the bridge for another few minutes. The creek ran below me in the dark, making the sound it always made, indifferent and continuous. Then I drove back to the post. I wrote in my personal journal that night, rather than in the official log. I wrote, "An elk standing in water for 17 minutes without any observable biological function is not possible. An elk standing in water for 17 minutes, in the dark, facing upstream, and then resuming normal behavior without transition is not a sick animal or an injured animal. A sick animal does not recover instantly. An injured animal does not walk away cleanly. What I observed does not have a biological explanation that I am aware of." I underlined that last sentence. Then I read it again, and I underlined it a second time. I was beginning to understand that the rules were not superstition. They were documentation. Someone had seen these things before me and had written down the correct response. The correct response, in each case, was the same. Do not engage. Do not illuminate. Do not intervene. Do not draw attention to the fact that you have noticed. The third rule came to me the way the best ones always do, in daylight, in an ordinary setting, when I had no reason to be on guard. It was a warm morning in June, a Tuesday. I had the lab window open to let in the air while I processed the week's camera images on my laptop. The lab was the smallest room in the post, just wide enough for a processing desk, a filing cabinet, and a narrow shelf of reference texts. I had my French press on the corner of the desk, half empty. I was clicking through images on the camera from Transect A's midpoint station, mostly deer, a coyote, a porcupine that had apparently decided to investigate the camera housing at close range for 20 minutes. I heard the wing beat before I saw the bird. A single, clean sound of something landing on the desk edge to my left. I turned my head. A Clark's nutcracker sat on the lip of the desk, 3 feet from my right hand. Gray body, black wings, white patches, the long, tapered bill. A common bird at this elevation. I had seen dozens of them in the trees around the post, but this one was sitting on my desk, inside the lab, without any of the behavioral markers of a bird that has entered a building accidentally. A bird that flies indoors accidentally is immediately alarmed. It seeks the light. It throws itself at windows. It vocalizes. It panics. This bird was doing none of those things. It sat on the edge of the desk and looked at me with one eye, then turned its head and looked at me with the other, the way birds do, and then settled into a posture of complete stillness. I held very still. My field training told me not to make sudden movements near a wild bird, but field training also told me that a wild bird that did not attempt to leave an enclosed space was displaying abnormal behavior. I ran my eyes over it quickly. Plumage condition, eye clarity, beak, feet. There was nothing wrong with it. It was a healthy Clark's nutcracker sitting on the edge of my processing desk, looking at me. I thought of the third rule. If a bird of any species enters the post through an open door or window and lands without attempting to leave, do not chase it out. Open every exit and wait in the doorway until it chooses to go. I stood up slowly. I fully opened the lab window. I opened the lab door into the main office. I opened the main office door into the kitchen. I opened the kitchen door to the equipment porch. I opened the porch door to the clearing. Then I came back to the lab doorway and stood in it with my back to the door frame, the bird clearly visible on the desk from where I stood. And I waited. The bird sat there for 11 minutes. I know, because I was watching my watch. It did not move its feet. It did not turn its head again. It sat facing the open window and was still. At 11 minutes and some seconds, it turned its head once, then launched from the desk edge and flew cleanly through the open window. I heard its wings in the spruce branches outside for a moment, and then it was gone. I walked back to the desk and sat down. My French press was cold. I looked at the edge of the desk where the bird had been sitting, and then I looked at what it had been sitting on, because in my haste to open the exits, I had not paid attention to where, specifically, on the desk it had landed. It had been sitting on a printed data sheet. My most recent bear activity log, the previous week's grid summary, with camera coordinates printed along the top margin. The sheet was undamaged, but running diagonally across the printed grid, passing cleanly through a specific set of coordinates, was a single talon mark. A thin, precise line in the paper where one talon had pressed just hard enough to score the surface without tearing it. I looked up the coordinates on my transect map. The talon mark ran through the location of the trail camera at the northern end of Transect C, the camera furthest from the post, the one I had to approach through a difficult section of windfall to reach. I had not pulled that card yet that week. It was scheduled for Thursday. I pulled it that day instead. The images were ordinary. Deer, a black bear passing through, wind-blown branches triggering false activations. Nothing that matched any of the non-standard protocol behaviors. I told myself the talon mark was coincidence. A bird's talon is not a pointer. Coordinates on a datasheet are not a map being read. I told myself that, and I mostly believed it, but I pulled the card early every week for the rest of that season. And I was always slightly disappointed or slightly relieved. I was never sure which to find ordinary footage on it. The discovery that shifted everything came in July, between the third and fourth incidents. I had been thinking about Adler, the previous ranger, more than was probably useful. I had a name, a brief description, and a set of rules that told me he had spent 2 seasons at this post, seeing things that required a written response. I wanted to know what he had seen. On a supply run to Hungry Horse, I stopped at the district office and asked about him. The district coordinator, a woman named Hessel, who had been with the Forest Service for 20 years, gave me the polished, minimal version. Adler had been a capable ranger, had requested a transfer at the end of his 2nd season, was now working in a regional planning role. She said it with the particular smoothness of someone reciting a settled story. I found his contact information in the district directory that afternoon and called him from the road, sitting in my truck at a pull-off with a cell signal. The Flathead Valley spread out below me in the afternoon light. He answered on the 3rd ring. I introduced myself, told him I was at Keller Creek, and told him I had found the page. There was a pause, not a long one. Then he said, "You found it. Good." "I've been following it," I said. "Keep doing that." I asked him who wrote the rules. Another pause, longer this time. "I added the last 2, he said, 5 and 6. The first 4 were already there when I arrived." I asked him who had been at the post before him. He said the post had been unstaffed for 6 years prior to his posting. A budget gap, deferred assignments, something administrative, 6 years empty. I thanked him and ended the call. I sat in the truck for a while, looking at the valley. Then I drove back to the post in the gathering dark, on the 2-lane road that wound through the trees, crossing Keller Creek on the narrow bridge, the headlights catching the surface of the water below. I thought about a handwritten page tucked inside a binder in an empty building. No ranger, no lights, no French press coffee on the desk. Just a building in the trees, and a page waiting inside it. And whatever was in the trees around it, doing what it did. Someone had written the first 4 rules, and then left the post, or been removed from it. 6 years later, Adler had arrived and found them. Adler had spent 2 seasons following the first 4 rules, and adding 2 more from his own experience. Then Adler had transferred to a planning office and stayed there. And then I had arrived and found all 6. I went inside that night and read the rules again in the kitchen light. The 4th rule was the one I had not yet encountered. I understood, driving back in the dark, that it was coming. It came 3 weeks after my conversation with Adler. I was on my regular Tuesday camera pull for Transect B, the eastern transect that ran along a ridge above the creek drainage. Transect B had 6 cameras spaced roughly evenly over 340 meters of maintained trail, a good corridor for large predator movement. I had been monitoring a gray wolf pack in the area, 3 adults, 2 juveniles, a family group that used the drainage regularly. I knew their travel patterns well. I knew where they scent marked, where they rested, how they moved through a landscape. Wolves use trails for the same reason people do: efficiency. They walk the path of least resistance, but they also move like wolves, scanning, sniffing, pausing, adjusting, constantly reading the environment. When I sat down in the lab on Tuesday evening to process the Transect B cards, I was not expecting anything unusual. I loaded the first card and began clicking through the images. The wolf appeared on camera 1 at 3:17 a.m. It was a large, gray adult, a male by its build. It was walking south on the trail, toward the post. It was walking in the exact center of the trail. I noted that and scrolled forward. Camera 2, 3:19 a.m. Same wolf, same position, exact center of the trail, not drifting left or right. Camera 3, 3:21 a.m. Same wolf, same position, same pace. I pulled up all 6 cards and arranged them in sequence on my laptop screen. I watched the wolf traverse the full 340 meters of transect B in a straight line at a perfectly steady pace, centered on the trail with the precision of a surveyor's instrument. It did not look left. It did not look right. It did not lower its nose to the ground at any of the 3 scent posts I had documented on that transect over months of monitoring 3 locations where this wolf or its pack had marked repeatedly. Locations that should have triggered at minimum a pause, a sniff, an acknowledgement. It passed all 3 without any change in pace or posture. It walked the trail the way a cursor moves across a screen. Mechanically, purposefully, without the quality of ongoing decision-making that animal locomotion requires. I remembered the 4th rule. If a predator is seen on the survey, transect walking the exact center of the trail in a straight line without deviation, recall all trail cameras on that transect for the next 72 hours. Do not review the footage until the cameras are back at the post. I had already reviewed the cards. The rule said to recall the cameras and then wait 72 hours to review the footage. I had done it backward. I sat with that for a moment, then decided the intent of the rule was clear enough. Bring the cameras in. Wait. I drove out to Transect B the next morning and pulled all 6 cameras from their housings. I brought them back to the post and set them on the lab shelf. I did not put the footage on my laptop again. I noted the date and the time I had recalled the cameras. I set a reminder on my watch for 72 hours later. Those 3 days were uncomfortable, not frightening. I am trying to be precise, but uncomfortable in the way that a loose thread in a piece of fabric is uncomfortable. I was aware of the cameras sitting on the shelf. I was aware of whatever was on those cards that I had not yet seen. I went about my other work. I drove to the high meadow for an elk count. I processed the conflict zone report for the ranch to the west. I made my French press coffee and drank it on the equipment porch in the morning cold. On the 73rd hour, I gave it an extra hour because I am a careful person. I sat down in the lab and opened the footage. The wolf appeared on 5 of the 6 cameras, exactly as I had seen before. On camera 1 through camera 5, the same straight line traversal, the same mechanical pace, the same fixed attention to nothing and everything simultaneously. The footage was identical to what I had reviewed before. I watched it through to camera 5 and noted nothing new. Then I opened camera 6, the northernmost camera, at the far end of the transect, the one furthest from the post. The wolf was not on camera 6. Camera 6 had been triggered. The motion sensor had activated, and the footage was there, continuous, running at the correct timestamp. But the wolf did not appear on it. What camera 6 showed was the trail itself, the empty trail, the tree line on either side, the ordinary visual field of a wildlife camera in a forest. And at the left margin of the frame, where the detection zone faded into the unlit forest, there was a darkening. I want to be precise about this because precision is the only tool I have. It was not a shadow in the conventional sense. There was no light source at that hour that would have cast a shadow at the left margin of a camera frame. It was a region of the image that was darker than it should have been, given the ambient light conditions. And that darker region had a vertical dimension and a horizontal dimension that were inconsistent with the camera's expected visual field. It had a shape, not a clear shape, not a shape I can describe to you in terms of anatomy or outline, but it had the quality of a shape, a coherent, bounded area of darkness that occupied the left margin of the frame and did not move. It was there on every frame of camera 6's footage. For 40 minutes, from 3:24 a.m. to 4:04 a.m., the shape was at the left margin of the frame. Then, on the frame timestamped 4:04:13 a.m., it was not. No transition, no gradual departure. On one frame, it was there. On the next frame, it was not. I sat in the lab for a long time after that. The SD cards were lined up on the desk beside my laptop. The French press was cold on the corner of the desk. The equipment porch door was open, and I could hear the creak from where I sat, the way I always could when the wind was from the east. I filed a standard report, noting an unusual wolf traversal behavior on transect B. I described the straight line movement and noted it as a possible behavioral anomaly worth monitoring. I did not mention camera 6. I did not mention the shape at the margin of the frame. I closed the footage files and archived them to an external drive that I kept in my personal bag, rather than the lab's shared storage. I told myself I was being appropriately cautious with ambiguous data. I think what I was actually doing was following the spirit of the protocol without knowing there was language for it. Logged. Did not engage. The fifth rule was the one that broke something in me. Not dramatically. Quietly, the way ice breaks a sound you almost don't hear. And then the surface is different. It was August. The high meadow was at its best in August, the grasses tall and golden, the elk using it heavily in the early morning hours before the heat sent them back into the trees. I was there at 6:15 a.m. for a population count, parked at the meadow's southern edge with my binoculars and my observation forms on the clipboard. The sun was just clearing the eastern ridge, and the light came across the meadow horizontally, catching the seed heads of the grasses and turning them briefly luminous. There were 14 elk, visible 9 cows, 3 calves, 2 young bulls. I was working through my count when I lowered my binoculars to note a position on my form and looked up to find a mule deer standing at the tree line to my northwest. This was not unusual. Mule deer used the meadow frequently. They were often present at the edges during elk surveys, staying in the transition zone between open ground and tree cover. I noted the deer in my peripheral count column and looked back at the elk. I could feel the deer watching me. That is not a biological statement. That is an experiential statement, and I am making it as precisely as I can. I lowered my binoculars and looked at the deer directly. It was looking at me. That was not unusual either. Prey animals watch observers. They assess threat. They sustain attention on a potential danger until they have determined whether to flee. This is normal. I looked back. The deer did not look away. 10 seconds? 20? A minute. The deer did not look away. I am an experienced field biologist. I have had prey animals watch me for extended periods. I know the difference between an animal that is watching a threat and an animal that has decided the observer is not a threat and is simply monitoring. The deer was doing neither. It was watching me with an attention that was, and I am going to use the accurate word here, the one I wrote in my personal journal that night. Deliberate. It was deliberate in the way that a person's gaze is deliberate. There was something behind it that was making a choice about where to look and what to look at, and for how long. 2 minutes. I was checking my watch. At 2 minutes and some seconds, I felt something I had not felt in 8 years of fieldwork. I felt recognized, not seen recognized. The feeling that the thing behind those eyes knew what it was looking at and had been waiting for an opportunity to look at it, and was now doing so with unhurried patience. I remembered the 5th rule. If any animal makes sustained eye contact with you for longer than you are comfortable with, break contact first. Look at the ground. Do not speak. Walk backward to your vehicle or the post. Do not turn your back. I looked at the ground. I saw the trodden grass at my feet, the soil damp from the previous day's rain. I turned my body carefully until I was facing south, toward my truck, parked 200 meters across the open meadow. I began to walk, backward, one deliberate step at a time, facing the tree line where the deer stood, covering ground behind me by feel. The meadow grass was uneven, and I nearly lost my balance twice, but I did not turn around. I kept my eyes on the tree line. The deer did not move. 200 meters of open meadow at a slow, careful backward walk takes a very long time. I counted my steps. I covered the ground. I reached the truck, found the door handle behind me, opened it, and sat down in the driver's seat. I pulled the door closed. I looked at the tree line. The deer was still there. It was still looking at me. I drove away. That evening, I called my younger sister, Daniela, who lives in Missoula. We talked for nearly an hour. We talked about her job, her apartment, a book she was reading, a recipe she had tried. We talked about our mother's upcoming birthday. We talked about nothing of consequence, and I did not mention the deer, or the meadow, or any of what I had been thinking about since April. After I hung up, I sat in the kitchen with the light on, and understood why I had called her. I had called her because I needed to hear a voice that I was certain was only human. The forest had spent the summer filling my ears with sounds that looked like animal behavior and felt like something else entirely. And I needed the sound of my sister talking about a recipe to remind me what a mind with nothing behind it but ordinary human experience sounded like. I think that was the moment I knew I would not stay for a 5th season. The 6th rule came 3 weeks before the end of my 4th season, and it came quietly, the way the last thing always does. I was doing a perimeter walk on a Thursday morning in early September. The larch needles had started turning gold, the first pale yellow showing at the tips when I saw the fox. It was lying on its side on the ground, 12 meters from the equipment porch, in a small clearing between two spruce trees. A red fox, adult, in good coat, lying perfectly still with its eyes closed. My first thought was injury. My second thought was illness. I moved toward it and stopped myself. I ran through the 6th rule in my mind, which I had by then memorized along with all the others. If you find a dead animal on or within 50 meters of the post perimeter, do not touch it, photograph it, or report it as a wildlife mortality. Mark the location in your personal notes only. Check the same location at the same time for the next 3 days. If the animal is gone before the 3rd day, without evidence of scavenging, close your notes on the incident and do not reopen them. I took a compass bearing from the equipment porch door to the fox's position and noted the distance. I wrote both in my personal notebook. I walked back to the post without touching the animal or photographing it, though my camera was in my vest pocket, and every professional instinct I had said to document what I had found. The next morning, at the same time, I walked back to the same location. The fox was there. It lay exactly as it had the day before, on its side, eyes closed. The September air was cool, and there was dew on the grass around the animal. There was no dew on the fox itself. I noted, day 2, animal present, no change in position, no evidence of decomposition, no insect activity, no scavenger activity. I walked back to the post. I want to explain what the absence of insect activity means from a biological standpoint, because I think it matters. A dead animal in a forest ecosystem in early September, in the Flathead, does not remain undisturbed. It begins to attract blowflies within hours of death. Ravens, which are abundant in this area, can locate a carcass within a day. Coyotes, bears, and other scavengers will follow within 24 to 48 hours. A dead red fox lying in the open, 12 meters from a building, in warm enough weather for insect activity, should have been actively decomposing and surrounded by scavengers by the 2nd morning. It was not. The forest around it was operating normally. Ravens called from the spruce canopy. A coyote had crossed the clearing in the night. I could see its tracks in the damp ground. The coyote's tracks stopped approximately 4 meters from the fox and turned. The tracks did not approach the body. The 3rd morning, I woke early and was at the location by 7:05 a.m. The fox was gone. There was no blood. There was no fur. There were no drag marks, no impressions in the ground where a scavenger might have gripped the carcass, no evidence of any biological process that would result in the removal of a fox-sized body from that location. The ground where the fox had lain was unmarked. The grass was not flattened in the shape of the animal's body. The soil was clean. It was as if the fox had been a thought rather than a thing, and the thought had been withdrawn. I stood in the clearing for a moment. The larch needles drifted down around me in the still morning air, yellow and unhurried. I took out my personal notebook. I found the entry for the fox, the bearing, the distance, the 2 observation notes. I closed the notebook. I put it in my vest pocket. I walked back to the post and made my French press coffee and stood on the equipment porch and watched the tree line. I did not reopen my notes on it. I have not reopened them to this day. I finished my 4th season. I processed my final camera pulls, submitted my end-of-season data, completed my equipment inventory, and wrote my transition notes for whoever would come next. I found the handwritten page in my personal notebook and considered what to do with it. I made a copy in my own handwriting, a clean copy, and tucked it into the back cover of the wildlife incident binder. Then I folded the original and put it in my bag. I still have it. In my exit paperwork, I listed my reason for not renewing as a professional opportunity. The Conservation Trust position had approached me, and the terms were good. That was true. It was also not the reason. The reason was the 6th rule's closing instruction. Close your notes on the incident and do not reopen them. I had been treating it as an instruction about the fox. By the end of the season, I understood it was an instruction about the post. Some things are best closed. I settled into the trust position. Office work, land assessments, conservation easement negotiations. I missed the field. I missed the camera pulls and the elk counts and the cold mornings on the equipment porch. I did not miss the stillness. I did not miss the 41 minutes of a bear watching a building. I did not miss 17 minutes of an elk turned off in a creek. I did not miss the shape at the margin of camera 6's frame, sitting in the darkness for 40 minutes at the far end of transect B. I did not miss the mule deer's eyes on me across 200 meters of open meadow, and the feeling of something behind them that knew exactly what I was. I have thought, in the years since, about what the rules were for. At first, I thought they were protective ways to avoid provoking dangerous wildlife, or to manage situations that standard protocol had not anticipated. Then I thought they were procedural, the accumulated response of careful observers who had documented something unusual and were trying to behave consistently in the face of it. But I have come to a third understanding, the one I think is closest to correct, and it is this. The rules were not designed to protect the ranger from the animals. They were designed to protect the ranger from being noticed by whatever was using the animals. Every rule is a way of not responding. Do not haze the bear. Do not illuminate the elk. Do not chase the bird. Do not review the footage. Break eye contact. Do not report the carcass. Every rule is a way of saying, I see this, and I am choosing not to confirm that I have seen it. The rules are a performance of non-recognition. They are a way of passing the test without revealing that you understand it is a test. I do not know if whatever occupies the flathead is intelligent in any way I could define. I do not know if it has intentions, or a purpose, or a memory. I do not know if it knew, the whole 4 years, that I had found the page, that I was following the rules, that every careful non-response of mine was itself a response. I do not know if it watched me through the bear's eyes, and the elk's stillness, and the deer's 3-minute gaze, and made any determination about what I was. I do not know any of these things. What I know is this. 4 months ago, my colleague sent me a trail camera clip from the Bitterroot National Forest, 2 counties south of Flathead. I watched it 3 times. In it, a gray wolf walks the exact center of a trail in a straight line, at a perfectly steady pace, without deviation, for the full length of the camera coverage. It does not look left or right. It does not lower its nose. It does not alter its pace. It moves through the frame with the mechanical precision of something that has learned how to operate an animal's body and has not yet perfected the rendering of small, incidental behaviors that make locomotion look like thought. It is identical to the footage from Transect B. I closed my laptop and did not open it for 2 days. When I opened it again, I told my colleague I had reviewed the clip and that the behavior was likely a wolf using a game trail in a familiar pattern, and that I would look into the literature on repetitive trail use in established pack territories. She thanked me, and I closed the email. I have not stopped thinking about it since. I keep coming back to the same question, the one I cannot answer and cannot stop asking. When I followed the rules for 4 seasons, when I refused to haze the bear, when I sat in the dark truck and did not shine the light, when I opened every exit for the bird and stood in the doorway and waited, when I walked backward across 200 meters of open meadow without turning around, did that compliance make me invisible? Did 4 years of careful, consistent, non-response convince whatever was looking that I was not a person of interest? Did I pass by, going unnoticed? Or was the opposite true? Was my consistent compliance the most interesting thing I could have done? Did 4 years of a human being following 6 handwritten rules, rules that should have seemed bizarre, rules that required overriding professional training and institutional protocol, did that make me more visible, not less? Did the rules reveal me, rule by rule, as someone who understood the game? Which is perhaps the most dangerous thing to be. I do not know. I cannot know. And the trail camera clip from the Bitterroot tells me that whatever I was in relationship with at Keller Creek has not stayed at Keller Creek. My colleague's post in the Bitterroot has a new ranger this season, a young woman who graduated from the wildlife biology program at Montana State. She is, by all accounts, talented and enthusiastic and well-trained. I do not know if there is a handwritten page tucked into the back of her wildlife incident binder. I do not know if there is anything in her station that would tell her what to do if a bear stops at the tree line and does not vocalize, if an elk stands in a creek at night and does not move, if a bird lands on her desk and waits. I think about whether I should send her something, a letter, a copy of the page. I think about Adler, who followed the first 4 rules and added 2 more and then left. I think about whoever wrote the first 4 rules, who left them in an empty building and then was gone before I arrived. I think about the way knowledge passes through remote posts and handwriting and folded paper and binders left behind for the next person. And I think about whether that chain of transmission is something to be grateful for or something to be afraid of. I still have the original page. I take it out sometimes and read it. All 6 rules, in 2 different handwritings, the first 4 in one hand, clean and deliberate, and the last 2 in Adler's hand, which I recognize now from the transit notes he left in the station files. 6 rules, 2 authors, 1 page, sitting in a building for 6 years between them, waiting for a reader. I miss Keller Creek in the mornings. I miss the way the light came across the meadow in August and turned the grass luminous. I miss the sound of the creek under the bridge on a dark road, that particular cold sound of water that has no interest in you. I miss the elk in the early light, and the French press coffee, and the weight of binoculars around my neck on a long survey day, and even the patient, repetitive work of pulling camera cards and processing images and finding, most of the time, the ordinary and beautiful behavior of animals living their lives in a forest. I do not miss the stillness. I do not miss the moments when the animal behavior stopped being behavior and became something else, a signal, a test, a form of attention directed at me from behind a set of eyes that did not belong to what was wearing them. But I think about those moments more than I think about anything else from those 4 years. I think about the bear at the tree line with its eyes fixed on the building for 41 minutes. I think about the elk in the black water, paused like a thought someone was still having. I think about the talon mark across the grid coordinates, and the shape at the margin of camera 6's frame, and the deer's eyes across the meadow, holding mine for 3 minutes with something that felt, God help me, almost like recognition. I followed the rules, all 6 of them, every time, for 4 seasons. I kept my notes private. I filed clean reports. I did not engage. I just cannot tell you, even now, whether not engaging was the right choice, whether it protected me, whether it was even possible, by the time I arrived and found that page in the binder, to have any choice at all. The wolf in the Bitterroot clip walks in a straight line down the center of the trail, and it does not look left, and it does not look right, and it does not slow down. It moves with the certainty of something that knows exactly where it is going, and it has already been where it is going. And the place it has been was mine for 4 years. I closed my notebook on the fox. I know the instruction. I know what closing means. I just keep thinking about the ranger in the Bitterroot who does not know, yet, what she is looking at, who is pulling her camera cards on a Tuesday morning, clicking through images of deer and coyotes and the ordinary, beautiful life of a forest, who has not found the page yet, if there is a page, who still believes, the way I believed in April of my first season, that wildness follows rules she has studied and can trust. I hope she is right. I hope the rules she has studied are the only rules there are. I do not think she is right. And I do not know, at this point, whether sending her something would help her, or whether it would only make her, as it made me, exactly the kind of person that something patient and old and very good at using the local wildlife has been waiting to find.